Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Gordon Smith, and I'm joined this week by Jay Shabbat and Meghna Maharishi. In part one, we're bringing you the key takeaways from a major DC aviation summit, and in part two, we'll explain why Greece is such a hot market. Meghna, welcome back to the lounge. Delighted that you're able to join us here in part one to discuss the Washington DC Aerospace Summit before Jay and I talk all things Greece in part two. We're recording here on September the 11th. That's a little earlier than usual as we have the Skift Global Forum in New York City next week, which is going to be taking up a lot of our bandwidth. But as we are recording here on Thursday, Meghna, you just got back from DC yesterday. Firstly, tell our listeners who might not be too familiar, where did you go? What were you doing? What was it all about?
Yeah, so this past week, the US Chamber of Commerce, which is essentially the largest business association lobbying group in the United States, they hosted their aerospace summit, which brings together executives in the airline industry, the aerospace industry, just to discuss trends in the industry and then also a lot of the policy developments in Washington. I think this year there's definitely a lot more of like a Washington slant to it than I had felt last year when I attended for the first time. And I guess that makes sense because it is in Washington, D.C. And there also are a lot of senators that will talk about like the future of aviation and space in the US as well. So it's always kind of like great to go because you'll just see like a lot of like major airline CEOs there. Like this year, the CEOs of United, Alaska, Southwest, JetBlue, and Allegiant were all in attendance.
And with so many heavyweights there, would you say there was a dominant theme to this year's summit, or are they all looking for different things?
There are a couple dominant themes, I would say. I think, at least on the airline front, the biggest theme that we're seeing right now, and this has just been generally throughout the year, is this air traffic control modernization. I think there's a really big push in Washington and beyond to actually do something about the aging infrastructure in the US when it comes to air traffic control, since it's just been in the news more, as we saw with the meltdown out of like Newark, for example, in May. So that's definitely was like a very big theme. Like the conference started with an opening talk from FAA Administrator Brian Bedford, who basically was saying that this was one of their biggest priorities. Another kind of curveball, which was interesting to me and which I wasn't really expecting, was that it seemed as if flying taxis, or also known as eVTOLs, and supersonic flight, those were very big themes at this conference. I was actually surprised at the number of times it came up when airline executives were asked about it. And then also Blake Scholl, the CEO of Boom Supersonic, he had a panel. And then also Adam Goldstein, the CEO of Archer Aviation, he also had a panel. And I guess also because in Washington, there is a lot of interest in that technology. And I think also a lot of pressure to bring that to market by at least next year.
I know you've written about those topics in some detail, not least a feature for Skift. Did you get the impression, Meghna, that the buzz maybe around advanced air mobility, supersonics, eVTOLs, whatever you want to call the various projects that are underway, is that because the technology has genuinely moved further, made some real progress in the past 12 months, or is this purely based down to maybe a slightly more open-minded administration in Washington to these new generation products?
A lot of this interest has been fueled by those two executive orders that Donald Trump signed a few months ago that were basically meant to speed up the process of certifying supersonic flight and then also certifying flying taxis. I believe one of Trump's executive orders was to essentially speed up the pilot program for the flying taxis because that's really like the main missing component right now for them to achieve the FAA certification. And then for supersonic flight, I believe the Trump administration also lifted the cap that the FAA had placed on operating, supersonic flight on the mainland US or whatever. So I think that was pretty significant in the development for that. I'm unsure if exactly the technology is there that by 2030 we would be maybe having like 3-hour flights between like New York and London or something, or that maybe everybody will start taking a flying taxi to JFK. That I'm still not entirely sure about. So it's hard to tell if it's all like smoke and mirrors, but now there's this like executive order that's like giving it real heft.
Yeah, fascinating to watch. I remember passing through Newark a few years ago, and there was I think it was Boom, don't quote me on that, a rendering of a United Airlines aircraft, certainly a supersonic one, and it would say taking you from Newark to Heathrow in 3 hours, coming 2026, 2028, whatever it may have been. And I remember even then thinking that timeline looks a little ambitious, but who knows? Who knows? Someone might be listening back to this in 10 years and saying, haha. I think there's still a lot of cynicism in the industry, and I think you're always going to have these slightly wacky cheerleaders for new products, innovations, whatever they may be in whatever industry. And I think it is just trying to work out the where the breakthrough is going to be to actually translate all of this from what you suggest, smoke and mirrors and all does still feel quite abstract into something that could be really, really tangible. And I think the recent executive orders and other elements, as we've discussed elsewhere on Skift and Airline Weekly, could give a bit more momentum to that. But just bringing it right back to the here and now, the airline industry as it stands today, Meghna, there were obviously, as we've mentioned, a good number of C-suite, not least CEOs from everyday airlines, if you want to call them that, as opposed to the next generation arches and booms and everything else. Was there one particularly compelling speaker this year, or maybe someone that actually you thought could have went a little bit further? What was your reaction to the big names that we know and love?
I think Scott Kirby at United is sort of always a compelling speaker, and I will say out of all the CEOs that I've heard, I still think he had the most compelling session. I don't know if it's maybe just the way he talks and presents his ideas. It almost sounds as if he's, like, saying something new every time, even though he's not necessarily doing that. And, I think, like, one of the things that I found insightful were Kirby's comments on the US economy and how he had a lot of faith in its resilience and how he believed that it was still strong because airlines like United are still seeing very high demand. And if anything, all the uncertainty we saw like earlier in the year over tariffs that was really depressing demand and causing airlines to pull their 2025 outlooks. Now, like the industry has done a complete 180 and they're seeing like really promising trends and demand. So I thought those comments were interesting, especially because it came out like he made those comments on the same day that the jobs report came out, which had revised, I believe, which had revised us to say that we were maybe had lost around like nearly a million jobs. And it seemed to be like a sign that the economy was potentially weakening. So just that juxtaposed with that, I thought was very interesting. And then also the next day, uh, Delta CEO Ed Bastian was at a separate event in Washington and made similar comments to Kirby. So I guess we're basically seeing airlines like United and Delta, they're just reporting very strong returns, and a lot of it has been really fueled by these wealthier, high spend travelers.
Yeah, I loved your story yesterday from Ed Bastian following his comments about, what was it, 95% of Delta's, is it regular travelers or travelers in general, are coming from 100K plus households? Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Ed Bastian said at least 95% of Delta's revenues are coming from households that are earning at least $100,000. So nearly all of their revenues are coming from six-figure households. I mean, that's like not I mean, with most airlines, I believe the customer profile, the average customer profile is probably a six-figure household just to begin with. But I think what was so shocking about that statistic was the fact that it was nearly every single one of Delta's revenues. And also when you think of the markets that Delta is really big in, like New York or LA, it's definitely like you're seeing a much more like high spend, wealthier traveler, one that can like wants to, hang out in the Delta One lounge at JFK before they go on their Delta One flight to like Milan or something. So I thought that was just really striking. And I think also like we're just generally seeing in a lot of consumer spaces, a lot of CEOs commenting on this sort of widening wealth gap where you have these wealthier people who are willing to spend on extra things like travel, whereas maybe more middle class or like budget travelers are definitely feeling squeezed by the effects of things like tariffs and a weakening job market. And we're also seeing that kind of play into the airline industry with some of the weaker domestic demand. That's been kind of like a big theme throughout this year.
Yeah, really, really fascinating, especially to watch it from this side of the Atlantic as well. It's quite easy to look at some of the US salaries. You look on LinkedIn and elsewhere, and you see these tech jobs on the West Coast saying, six figures for what feels like a very, very junior level role. So there might be some people listening to this program saying, hang on a minute, if you've got even two people in regular jobs in the US, you professions that we wouldn't consider to be super, super high earning, that could easily be 50K a piece. That puts you into Bastian's bracket. But I think your broader point is really, really interesting about the almost the dearth of the middle class in America in terms of companies targeting either those very, very cost conscious consumers at the lower end or the six-figure households, whatever pigeonhole you want to put into those, be it middle class, be it upper middle class. I think we need to sort of revise our definitions and our parameters around what constitutes a high-end household these days. We also heard at the DC Summit, Meghna, from the Airbus CEO, Guillaume Ferry. He was talking about transatlantic and all the various elements there, but also about China. Just tell us what he said about the threat of Chinese aircraft manufacturers, COMAC, namely, but also the real commercial possibilities and opportunities there for Airbus to be selling into China.
Yeah, I think, the heavyweights, Airbus and Boeing, really see a lot of potential in China. It's already a huge market, and it's expected to be an even bigger market in the next couple decades. So I think both of them really want to capitalize on that as much as they can, but also for both of them, there's obviously this threat of COMAC, which is China's state-owned aircraft manufacturer, and China is also now trying to go into the commercial aircraft game, and a lot of the major Chinese carriers are placing orders for COMAC jets, and some of them are currently operating them right now too. So I definitely think, at least in that market, I think Airbus and Boeing are a little bit worried that COMAC could take off and be really popular, and it would obviously greatly disrupt that duopoly. And I think that's what Fari's comments were really related to. But at the same time, it is also still unclear like how far COMAC can go. There's still a lot of regulatory hurdles that COMAC would need to go through in other markets if it were to become if their jets were to become more commonplace. And also, Boeing and Airbus do have, decades and decades of like reputation and experience that COMAC still doesn't have. And I think also, for whatever it's worth, Airbus did score a really big order in China, and I think Boeing is in talks to do the same thing.
Yeah, lots of whispers around a big, big order coming out of China, potentially 500 aircraft, and a lot of that tied to the ongoing trade discussions between China and the US. But a great point on COMAC there, Meghna. So much of COMAC's current supply chain is still anchored in suppliers from the US and Europe. A lot of those second and third tier suppliers also supplying products for Boeing and Airbus. So it's not as if they'll be immune to any of the supply chain headaches, and also still very, very reliant on the West, at least as we're speaking here in 2025. Meghna, if we were to revisit this conversation a year from now, you've just been to the DC Aerospace Summit 2026. What do you think may have changed in terms of commercial aviation, civil aviation, airlines in particular, based on what you heard this week?
I mean, if we're going strictly off what I've heard this week, I think they're all really hoping that at least by next year, flying taxis will maybe be a thing. I'm not too sure about that still. I mean,
By this time next year?
they're all aiming for a 2026 certification, and I believe Archer and Joby, which are the two biggest companies in this space, are already working to operate in the UAE right now, and I think they're actually slated to do that soon. But in the United States, their process has been delayed so many times. Like, there have been so many hurdles. I think also because the FAA is adjusting in real time to this technology. But I feel like if there were like one thing I were to take away from that conference, I think that's definitely something that they're hoping for by next year. I'm not entirely sure if it will happen. I think also, like, just for the commercial airline industry, I think if like I'm, next year at this conference, I think they'll be hoping more so for the same things. Just, again, no revisiting of tariffs on aerospace, and also again, like wanting to see that continued and sustained high travel demand.
Really appreciate you joining us on the program, Meghna. And for anyone that wants to read more of Meghna's reporting, go to skift.com. And a reminder that when you have an Airline Weekly subscription, you get all of the airline news on skift.com included in that package. Jay will be joining me in part two to discuss Greece. But before that, a quick reminder to send any questions or comments that you might have for us to podcasts@skift.com. That's podcasts with an S at the end. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, now joined by Jay Shabbat. We're going to talk about Greece, Jay, because we're recording here on the 11th of September, and we'll have, by the time you listen to this, Aegean, the big national carrier in Greece, their numbers for Q2 a little late, but nonetheless valuable insights, Jay. But we don't really need to know Aegean's latest numbers in order to get a broader picture about what's happening in Greece and in Athens specifically, Jay. But you've got a little fact for us, I believe, first.
Yes, hi Gordon. I do have a
Hi, Jay.
fact, and this one has nothing to do with Greece, and we'll get to Greece in a
What's
moment. But
what's the
our,
what's the opposite of a segue? An
yeah, this is
anti-segue, a diversion.
yeah. Here's my opening diversion, and then you can figure out a way to take us back on topic. But
Challenge
I
accepted.
challenge you. Yeah, I couldn't pass this up because it was an interesting fact from RTX. They're the parent company of Pratt and Whitney, the engine company. They said this morning, and again, we're talking on Thursday, here, September 11th. They mentioned that only 1 in 5 people globally have ever been on an airplane. I thought that was a little bit. I don't know. What do you think, Gordon? Do you think that my first reaction is, wow, that's less than I thought, but I don't know. What do you think? 1 in 5,
1 in 5,
20%
and
of
that's
or 80% of the world's people have never been on an airplane. It is a good reminder that, like you said, we kind of live in our own airline world and forget that 80% of the world's population has never been up in the air on an airplane. So yeah, good thing to keep in mind. And RTX was making that point because they were talking about how much growth the airline industry globally still has in the years and decades to come. That there are just so many people that haven't yet traveled that presumably want to for the many different reasons that people travel, whether it be leisure or visiting family or commerce or whatnot. And one of the markets where we've seen a ton of global growth over the past few years has been Greece. How'd you like that
that was a
transition
beautiful
slash
segue.
segue? Did
Yeah,
you like that?
after dragging me away from the topic, you've taken me back there beautifully. You've buttered that landing. That was wonderful, Jay. Go ahead.
Nice. Yeah, that was I'm proud of myself there. So let's talk about Greece for a moment. And as you mentioned, Aegean is going to be reporting next week. By the time that everybody's listening to this, we'll have the Aegean numbers. Aegean, interestingly, they are I believe, the very last of the major airlines that report, the very last to have reported for second quarter. I don't know what's taking them so long, but who am I to judge? We'll take their numbers as and when they give them. And I guess we can also give them a little bit of a pass because their numbers are usually very good. Aegean, and this is an important point I want to make, Aegean Airlines, the largest airline in Greece, has been very, very successful over the course of its corporate life. Last year, its operating margin was 13%. And I'll even be more precise and say it was 12.8%. And the reason for that precision is because I want to compare it to Ryanair, which is 12.5%. So just very ever so narrowly, Aegean edged out Ryanair in profitability for all of 2024. So you can see when you're beating Ryanair, you're doing something right. So a very successful airline. It tends to be a very, very seasonal airline. So they will lose money in the winter quarters. But in the first quarter of this year, their operating loss was just -1%, or their margin -1%. So that's totally acceptable. They're gonna totally make money in the spring and summer quarters. We'll find out soon if just how much money they made in the second quarter. That's the quarter that ended in June, and then the third quarter, which is almost over, is always their best quarter. They are seeing a lot of some of these Mediterranean airlines and other carriers that fly to Mediterranean destinations have said that some of the peakiness in summer traffic is spreading out a little bit more, and that's mostly because these places have had very hot summers, like extremely hot summers, even to the point where there have been dangerous wildfires. So Greece and markets like that, neighboring markets, have seen more tourism spread into the what we call the shoulder season. So think April, March, into October, November. So that should be, we're typically we'd see a big climb down about this time of year, mid-September, but that seems to be less of the case these days. So yeah, Aegean, it's just give you some growth numbers. Their capacity is up 3% year over year this quarter. That's from Cirium Dio. And that includes Olympic Air, which they purchased many years ago, but they still have a separate operating license for that. So I'm combining the two, and their capacity will be up by about 3% in terms of seats. But since 2019, their capacity is up 14%. And the Greek market overall, and sorry to throw so many numbers at you, but I just want to again underscore the growthiness of this market. Can I use the word growthiness? Is that a real word? I don't know.
Go on, coin it, Jay. And
yeah, that's maybe I can.
In 10 years, in 10 years' time, everyone will be using growthiness, and they'll say it was Jay Shabbat that coined this back on the Airline Weekly podcast.
Yeah, even better if I get a commission every time somebody says it, like some kind of fee, to license it somehow. Or
a modern day Dickens or Shakespeare. Here you go.
yeah. People confuse me with those two all the time, right? Anyway, Greek market this year is going to be up 7% in terms of seats. That's for the third quarter, but compared to the third quarter of 2019, up 35%. So one of the fastest expanding markets in the world in the post-COVID era. And the reason for that is quite simple. Leisure traffic has boomed, and Greece is just a very our typical leisure market. Just people coming in from not just short haul Europe, but lots of. I was surprised actually. I took a look at the Cirium schedules for U.S. traffic to Greece, and this is all to Athens. But American Airlines alone has flights, nonstop flights to New York, Charlotte, Philadelphia, Chicago. Delta has flights Boston, Atlanta, JFK to Athens. United, Washington, Dulles, Chicago, Newark. North Atlantic Airways is in that market too, JFK, LAX. And then Emirates flies Newark, Athens, which is a little bit unusual for them to fly a fifth freedom route like that, but they do it. And a big reason why they do it is because Aegean has, despite what I'm sure have been temptations over the years, have refrained from buying any wide bodies. So you could easily see them thinking like a WestJet or an Alaska. We talked about them in our last week's podcast, how they were ultimately tempted to go wide bodies just for the growth. Aegean has not given into that temptation. They remain an all narrow body carrier.
Thanks for that insight, Jay. And for full completeness, Aegean are getting what some might say about as close as you can get to being a wide body carrier without being a wide body carrier through the Airbus A321 XLR. So just earlier this year, I think it was July 16th here. We got the news that Aegean is taking the XLR. They've already got the 321 LR, but they are now going into the XLR sphere with a 5 times weekly service to Delhi, which is due to launch March 2026, followed by 3 weekly flights to Mumbai from May. And it's going to be just the start of what could be, depending if you believe the marketing materials or not, quite a significant move for Aegean into what I'd probably describe as the mid to long haul space using the XLR. They've already said, in addition to Delhi and Mumbai, that Bangalore, the Maldives, Seychelles, Nairobi, Almaty, and Lagos are all destinations under consideration. So what is currently quite a tight route network, I think Lisbon and Marrakesh and maybe down to Dubai, the UAE, is currently as far as they currently get on their existing metal. That could change in quite a big way with all of the XLRs due to join in the next couple of years, Jay. I do think, for what it's worth, them not going into the wide body space is the right move, particularly because you've got so much feeder traffic. Being a Star Alliance member as well, they can pick up everything coming in from United. And I do get the impression, Jay, that they're looking to make Athens a bit of a, not just a regional hub actually, but a meaningful hub in its own right, Jay. And we've got some new numbers out of Athens International Airport itself, which gives a little bit more color to that point.
Yeah, and good background on the XLR and some of the efforts by Aegean to push their boundaries. including the new India service. So Athens Airport is now a publicly traded company. So they are releasing quarterly reports and even doing quarterly earnings calls. And so I listened to their call just before speaking with you this morning, Gordon, and they mentioned a few interesting facts. One is that they do expect, to back up here, in 2024, their passenger traffic reached a record level. They grew traffic, passenger volumes over 2023 by 13%, and over 2019 by 25%. So they're again showing that Greece has been just a really successful growth market over the past few years. And it's not just the Greek islands, it's Athens, the capital, as well. They did say, this is an interesting statistic, 17% of the airport's traffic is connecting, and presumably that number is going to be higher for Aegean. There are a couple other Greek airlines that serve Athens, including Sky Express, which is a smaller carrier. And then Ryanair is pretty big there, and EasyJet, and you can go down the list. I mean, it's served by most of Europe's short-haul carriers. But that 17% connecting traffic is interesting. Remember this, Istanbul is, arguably the strongest hub in the world. I mean, I'm not saying it is, but you can make that argument. That wouldn't be no one would laugh you off or by making that proposition.
I wouldn't fall off my chair.
You wouldn't fall off your chair. Athens is geographically not that different from Istanbul. So you can see where geographically it would work very well for connections. Europe to the Middle East, ultimately Europe into India, Europe into Africa, some of the former Soviet space into some of these areas. So you can see geographically why it's a very nice location. Of course, the Athens is just not as big a market as Istanbul. The economy is not as big. Turkey is just a very large country, much larger country than Greece. The other thing about Greece is that it has had a, let's say, very troubled economic past over the, going back, particularly after the, sovereign debt crisis in Europe in the early 2010s. However, Greece today is one of Europe's faster growing economies. And I won't say it's, growing lightning fast by any means. It's not, 2005 China or anything, but it is kind of outpacing some other European economies. And a big reason for that outperformance is the topic we're discussing here today, and that's the tourism and the airlines and the success they've had bringing in tourists. That's a very, very big part of the Greek economy. So give Aegean and other Greek airlines and foreign airlines who fly to Greece some credit for that better economic performance. In fact, what Aegean will tell you is that over the past couple of years, with this better Greek economic performance, more Greeks themselves are now flying abroad. So it used to be where, there's a period for a while when the Greek economy was rather depressed. And make note, if you go back, let's say early 2010s, I mean, we're not talking about just an economic recession. I mean, Greece was in a depression. I mean, the unemployment of 25% and, which was like the US Great Depression in the 1930s. So it was really, really bad. But what we're seeing now is, like I said, more Greek nationals getting on planes and visiting London and visiting Spain and going to visit Gordon in Portugal and other places. So that's been kind of an added demand boost for Aegean. They're still getting a ton of incoming demand, which is their bread and butter, but they're getting some outbound as well.
Nothing wrong with a two-way traffic flow, Jay. Music to many route managers' ears. And if anyone is
and the connections, as we talked about.
If any Greeks are coming to Lisbon, please bring some of those stuffed vine leaves. I had those in Lisbon, in Athens, when I was there for the Kappa Summit back in May, and they were absolutely outstanding. I've tried to recreate them at home; it's just not the same.
I love those too.
Oh yeah, really, really good. Anything else to add on Greece, Jay, before we wrap up?
No, just looking forward to the Aegean results for us next week. For anybody who's listening, probably a couple days ago. We're living in different time spheres here, but we're time traveling. But be sure to know that our next issue of Airline Weekly, the one that comes out the following Monday, will have extensive coverage of Aegean's earnings. And even as a bonus, remember, since they are the last airlines to report Q2 results, what does that mean, Gordon? What are we going to share with our readers very soon?
The long-awaited Q2 scoreboard, I suspect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We're going to put together our beloved scoreboard, and we'll rank all the airlines in the world by profit margin, and you can see if your hometown airline where they rank, and hopefully their number is black and not red. I'm sure Aegeans will be black though.
Yeah, I think they're going to be fairly high up there. Just a question of how high up, Jay. But
Right.
look forward to that. And speaking of the week after next in our sort of time traveling universe, I will be at the Roots World event in Hong Kong, flying the flag for Skift in Airline Weekly. So if you do spot me there at the, I know it's this absolutely cavernous expo center, but if you do spot me there, do stop and say hello. Always love to have a chat with our listeners and our readers. Thanks to Jay Megna for joining me this week. And before we wrap up, just a quick reminder, podcast at skift.com. That's podcast with an S at the end. If you've got any questions or comments that you might have for us. Thanks also to our producers, Monica and Will, and wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.